Starting. Good. Good. Now grabbing link. Do 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 do. Studio. Man, YouTube has to be so confusing. My channel.
It's all to discourage you from touching it.
I guess. Okay, here we go. Good. Alright, my channel.
It's all to discourage you from.
Okay, so I'll copy the link into the lobby.
What?
There she be.
Oh my goodness. That is so cool.
Very good. And I'll get my monitor set up. So, last time, this is I guess you could say, continuation of maybe a series. And last week we spoke about perception mechanics in general. We went over one main diagram that we've recently put together. And we just...
Which has been fixed since then.
Right, yeah, so we'll have to go over some updates to that. And we just barely started to get into this kind of organizational structure stuff. So this is the first... We got a few hours right now. The first... say whatever half of it at least is going to be probably going over theory type stuff again, and hopefully within the last hour we might get into some more practical stuff with the card box game, but we'll have to see how far we get.
Right.
Yeah, so if you want to kind of maybe share your screen if you want to do the images, just because we'll kind of maybe let you take the lead on walking through the theory.
You have it disabled again.
Okay, we'll fix that.
I think it's a default or something like that, but you can set for your settings, but actually it's a security precaution too, so.
Right. Don't want anybody seeing Adam's junk or anything like that.
That's the other part. I was a little concerned. Like, which screens do I have open? Incidentally, at this point in time.
Sharing.
Don't worry, I am a safe individual.
Good. Okay, who can share all participants? There we go. Cool.
Alright.
Okay, so we'll get the monitor up and make sure that we're cool for levels and all that. But yeah, you can go ahead and load up some images there.
So are we seeing this?
Yeah, wait. Okay, so I need to full screen that. Cool, yeah.
Okay. I mean, just
Seeing
there it
that.
is. Yep, okay.
Nice.
Can zoom in. Yeah.
Good.
What have we fixed up? So this is a clarification of some concepts from the first meeting where we were going again talking about ABS, spectacle, space, cosmos, and narrative, and hyper-narrative and meta-narrative beyond that. So what happened? So first of all, we moved all narratives into the Cosmos bubble.
Right, so the middle area there. Maybe you could zoom in on that.
The middle area, well, it's zoomed in on the Cosmos is pretty big here.
Right.
One sec. So
it looks like it's just full screened. It doesn't look like it's zoomed in at all.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there you go. And you can probably click and drag.
There we go. So model is the most outer circle which encompasses the entire concept of the entire thing.
Yeah, that's new. I like that.
And then we have Cosmos.
Right.
And the cosmos is made up of this. It begins with being made out of an abstract phase space, which is just like a rawest form. In which the
Change. Okay, I don't know if you can still hear me, but Windows just did a retard. Okay, let's try this. Whoa. Okay, there we go. So sorry, we probably just lost whatever whatever you said in the last minute or so. My computer went dumb. Because yeah, I plugged in my phone and it decided to swap around all of the audio inputs for whatever reason. Yeah. So do we still have desktop? Shit. Dang it. Okay, that's that. Hold on a sec. Desktop audio. I think we lost you. Default. I don't know what to do except try turn that off and back on again. Default. Okay, can you test?
Test.
Yeah, good, okay. So that's, I don't know, anyways. That's really messed it up. I think we're back in business though, almost. Get full screened. Yeah.
All right.
Good. Yeah.
So I'm just going to recap the whole thing. We have Cosmos now, encompassing the entirety of the entire abstract layer here, which begins with the abstract phase space, which consists of the
Okay, good. Sorry, I'm just checking.
smallest bits of
Sorry, go ahead. Carry on.
constituents of the abstractions, basically the building blocks of all the different abstractions that go onto it, which expand into a space, which give a platform for a narrative to happen, which then is solidified with which has progressed to be a spectacle, kind of a moment by moment progression.
Concrete objects.
Right.
So the main thing here that we've kind of changed is that space and spectacle have been bound together in that kind of narrative. And
Yeah.
which makes sense because as we were describing the topology, like as if you're moving in and out, these are, and this is really, space is more towards memetics, right? That's how we were describing it before. It's kind of abstract, the abstract view.
Right. So the abstraction phase space feeds all of the abstract things, but we're going back to the memetic layer to put it all together into something that moves.
It's in a context, in an actual moving living organism context.
Right, which is fed through the top layer spectacle, which is still the memetic layer of the narrative. So that jumps back down into it. Makes sense? So we have, so we have our spaces being used up as a narrative, and this is the mechanism behind that. That mechanism being the spectacle, which is above the abstract phase space, but the internal constituents of both are actually in the memetic layer. So like the memetics provide all the different utilities and tools to put itself together into something. And these kind of act as the abstract phase space and the spectacle. They act as a whole focusing lens as to how to put those mimetics together. So really, all the square boxes here could be thought of as the mimetic part that's underneath the abstract layer, right? And the workings of the abstract layer happens using those as tools and putting them together, splitting them apart, and injecting stuff into that. Does that make sense?
Normally, yes, but I'm kind of distracted right now. Sorry. I'm setting up my monitor. Okay, just making sure everything is good. And that goes like that.
Right, and then we have these bounding cosmos and narrative bubbles, which are representative of something that happens within the spectacle, which we called a mode. So that gives us a kind of a 3-layer composition to the entire diagram, which are then, of course, represented via the separation between the narrative, the hypernarrative, and the meta-narrative, which kind of sit above the entire spectacular layer in the shared.
Just give me one sec here.
So it's a 4-layer diagram, really.
Wow, plugging my phone in like screwed everything up. It's insane. Even my video camera turned off. But now it's good. We are back in business.
Okay, how many times do we need to be back in business? And where did we leave off?
Here we go. As long as we're still rolling. That's the
Okay.
important part.
So, clear as mud, or is there anything
so-
that you'd want to ask?
Yeah, so I mean, narrative, to me, that makes sense that you would include that, the topology of like the space, because that's kind of like where the story, that's where you're in. You're kind of flowing through different valleys and plateaus of whatever.
Right.
Climbing in and out of context as you move along, that's part of narrative. And then I like the part, I don't know if I wasn't paying attention, if you got into about, so this whole thing being encircled as model, and then we have that little hook coming from the outside into and this is isomorphism, into one of the abstract phase space blocks representatives
Right.
there.
Right.
And this is saying that the whole thing is a model within the abstract. That
Yeah, like
Mhm.
you're injecting into it.
Right, and developing this as a model is what's going to allow you to have that experience of isomorphism between the model and your experience of the model when you try and look at your perception and what it's doing.
Right, bringing thought and action and all of that together, really. So that's that. That's the correction here. So hopefully it is a bit more complicated, I think, as a result. But I think it also simplifies the mental model that we need to consider moving forward. Because again, now that we have
Yeah.
it, we can reference it, and I can move forward from there.
Mhm. Yeah, this put quite a few things into one chart, which is great.
Right. Another point, just as a technicality to clarify stuff, this diagram here. Can you see it?
Yeah. Yep.
All right, so this is essentially what we're talking about when we're talking about consolidation. All right, so in the previous diagram, where did it go? I know you're here. So in the previous diagram where we had the spectacle, we have also this consolidation frame. and consolidation frame is where we had moved from one configuration of Minplex. Sorry, is when we moved from one moment in time to another one. So it's the space between the proximity complexes. It's when this proximity complex becomes that proximity complex through the archetype, and through the change of the archetype in between, right? Through the chaining of two different moments. Sorry, this stuff isn't easy even for me.
Yeah, I don't really quite understand how the Nexus model does that or represents that.
So so we have let's just take a moment, take one of the boxes, right, and consider it to be a moment of change through time. Now, how do we obtain this change? Well, we have the archetype on the one end, right, and this archetype is self-referential, and the self-reference is going to ask itself like, it's going to place itself empathetically or sympathetically to what it's reflecting. Right? So am I that or am I not that? Am I in that or is that in me? Or the opposites, right? So this is where what the thick line is determining right there. And that determines, okay, well, if I am this and that and the other thing, how do I, like, there's a dysmorphism going on. How do I fix that dysmorphism the dysmorphism is the signals coming in from the senses in relationship to the archetype itself, right? Like it's not matching. There's going to be imperfections.
Right.
So the imperfections present the situation of pain, mental pain, where your instinct is to, well, how do I resolve this? The proximity complex feeds the missing link in terms of, okay, well, the pain actually means this in relationship to me, right? And it is fixed by, so that gives it access to like calculate how to fix it, how to bring about an isomorphism. And so once we pass the thick line, is past the point of where we've done that. And so this side of the archetype is a shifted archetype into the next that sets up the stage for the next moment to happen. Right? So a moment is defined by a change, essentially, of going through this this process here between this side of the thick line to this side of the thick line.
Right.
Okay. So, what's consolidation? Well, now that it had happened, right, another moment starts, right, and the same thing happens again to move forward. So now we have two moments. So consolidation is the chaining of one moment to the next, to the next, to the next. You were consolidating all the different disparate parts of the system that we have set up in our space into a single sequence of consolidated narrative.
Yeah.
Right, and that's what gives us a beginning and an end point, and then it can be transformed into a single object within.
And this could be
next
even,
round.
Even like the experience of just thinking about a space and walking through it and all the different factors.
Right. So you can have this is about me, or this is about some space that I identify as. Right. Like the self-reference could be like in terms of an abstraction of some sort.
Right.
So yeah, and abstractions is kind of, it's weird to think about it that way, but really all it means is like, do I agree with it or do I not, and does it sit well within my way of thinking or not? So that's really what's going on there. It's not like some weird mystical thing. Anyway, so that's consolidation here, and the other diagram that I was using basically talks about what it is as its own thing. Where the heck did I put it now? There. And basically we're going from a unit, which is a single something, a single one of something. Then we're talking about the connection, which talks about, if you have more than one, how would you connect them together? That's like unit can connect to unit. That's what this arrow means. And then what does that connection mean? It means that units can point to another unit, and when that happens, what is it called? It's called a connection. And when you have a unit of a connection, when you have a connection and you send around units through that connection, right? You have what's called a transference. Like when units utilize the connection for something, they utilize it for transferring something between units, information transfer. And so when you have a transference, so on the other side now, if you have a transference within a connection, that constitutes a whole nexus of things as a unit onto itself. So the nexus represents a full-fledged bunch of units connected and transferring things between each other as another unit. And so once we get to the nexus between another unit, we're right back into being here, and the whole thing repeats. So consolidation is a recursive process, and this is what it looks like in a different context.
So this is like when you have like two different memeplex states or whatever, that all the different facets of them have to be reconciled with each other to move from one moment into another.
Right, because the previous memeplex is just a mechanical result of processing the proximity complex in relationship to an archetype, right? So that gets you a result. But now that result is fed into your space, but your space has other things that now need to connect to it, which are driven by what's in that space to begin with and what is the current change of the archetype is. And so the two things together sort of tell it, okay, I have this kind of edge combination here. What fits on the other side of it? And so it's like having a protocol between two objects, right? So you know whether they can communicate or not, flow together or not. And the quality there, of course, is also matters. So a lot of it is driven again by a very complicated, convoluted, probability based scenario. And the more you feed the isomorphism into it, the more you can sort of see what's happening and have choices over at least some of it.
Yeah, when it becomes more conscious.
Yeah, self-aware kind of thing. Cool.
Yep.
Maybe this is deserving a little bit of a mention because we're still discussing things in the context of this, of these layers.
This is the one that I wanted to pull up originally, but we pulled up the mirror table. But this one kind of gets more to the meat of like what I wanted to show was that, so we have these narratives, objects, types, whatever. Or rather object type and meme. That's what we were kind of discussing, the neural OS section. But then we're seeing that this is all codependently arising in that the holonic layer, the strange loop fashion, and we can see it going all the way down to through signal symbols to nerve and cells and particles.
Yeah.
So that kind of grounds this whole thing. Like, why would you want to care about it, or how do you orient this whole discussion of that the big new chart that we have? How do you orient that into like reality? Like, what does it mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's the mechanics of that is based in reality, in physical reality.
Physical and pattern. I don't know what you would call it's also a virtual reality. There's a virtuality to it going on that is the horizon between the two is kind of funny because it's literally the number system, the natural number sort of what do you call it? The number theory. Anyway, The thought behind that is basically is that it allows us to have a very arbitrary set of labels, meaning a very arbitrary set of things, aka
Yep.
programming. And once you have programming, things become sort of mixed up in a way that, like, say, I could take a couple of disconnected objects, slap an abstraction of a label on it, and all of a sudden they cease to have any meaning in one space and only have meaning in another space,
Hmm.
and the two can be quite disconnected to such an extent that it destroys the physicality of those objects.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, things happening up in higher layers, and when we say physical, we're not theorizing the existence of anything. This is merely the, like you say, virtual reality that's presented to you by the neural operating system.
yeah, exactly. So it can be quite arbitrary, but if you ground
Hmm.
it in at least a kind of a pattern, then it can have a heuristic to it, I guess.
Hmm.
And it's all, to my mind, it's all coming from a more of a from a deeper survival sort of source of function, and not any kind of ideological one.
Hmm.
Ideologies can switch around so long as the body can keep surviving for as long as it needs to. If we take reproduction into account, then we sort of beat that with the legacy, and away we go. Provided we have the
Uh-huh.
mythology to sustain generations and all that stuff. Anyway,
Hmm.
off topic. So to bring it a little bit more home, if we imagine all the square box stuff happening on the seventh mimetic layer as memes, that's kind of where we're at with those square boxes. And then we
Which
actually,
square boxes are you referring to?
in the really complicated,
Oh, just the big chart, the new one,
the new one, yeah.
whatever we call that.
Yeah, so the ones that get strung together into narratives, that's what we're looking at there. That's the mimetic layer. That diagram is hopefully showing the fact that they are more of a Lego pieces. The content itself is driving maybe an outer edge combination, sort of like how to link one to the next, so to speak, and how to calculate, how to transform one archetype into another via the proximity complex and the dysmorphism that's apparent with between it and the signals coming in from the senses.
Hmm.
Um,
I'm trying to think of how to.
so yeah, the squares only represent the mechanics. Like the mimetics are not, they're kind of dumb machinery kind of stuff, but not because of the content that they move through, right? They're very much dependent on that.
Mhm.
So that is kind of a comment as to why people can be, say, programmed. And what it means to be programmed is sort of layered within that. And what does it mean to be deprogrammed in terms of programming? And what kind of a program would deprogram a program that's
Mhm.
pre-programmed?
Good to know.
Program. Also
Um,
program. Anyway, that's the difficulty, right? Like that's the relationships, the web of relationships to wade through.
I'm gonna try and keep an eye on the chats, but do you get a notification when with Portal Mountain lobby?
I should.
Probably, yeah. Just try to keep an eye on that.
I didn't
Um,
see anybody. I just see yours as the last
yeah,
thing.
it's tough because I don't have a. My monitor is just I'm using it to watch the stream itself. So
Well, since all the images are in the chat, it should be easy for me to notice it.
right, yeah. So let's just keep an eye on that, and
Yep.
I'll try to pop back into the YouTube chat every now and then. I know there was some discussion last time there.
So this is more of a layer relationship diagram. There are actually a couple of things not mentioned. And they're implicit in
Just totally lost you.
there's a
A
relationship
couple
between.
things mentioned. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Okay, re-explain that. The diagram. We got nothing out of that.
Okay. So this is like another view of the relationships between layers themselves
Yeah.
amongst each other. The one thing this diagram isn't showing is that there's an implicit relationship between each adjacent layer. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
Right.
And we really kind of presented that, how they tie in together with with a really big new diagram as well. So it should be at least somewhat obvious that by now. This is just kind of giving us a treatment in terms of how some of these layers have a parallel in the other sort of horizons. That's what the thick lines are. They represent horizons, and we can get into those, but we don't really have to right now. They're just
Yeah.
not going to provide much useful content for this.
Basically, triad protocol.
But yeah, horizon is exactly what you think it implies. It's basically we kind of have a breaking point between one space and another, and
Right.
well, how does the information travel between that break?
So this is kind of the interesting point to note about this particular image, is that the concrete, abstract, and mimetic are the layers that we label the neural operating system, and it's sort of like phenomenologically you're sort of trapped in this. Like this is what you experience, and anything beyond that horizon is kind of being either constructed for you or like automatically, or you're 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 breaking it down and decomposing it to see what's happening below. So like the shared is
Right.
emergent, right? And
Right. So the
yeah.
shared, for instance, if you, let's say we're talking about thinking private thoughts. For most people, like there's exceptions to this, but for most people, that's kind of like it happens with words, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the funny part to it, is that you're not born knowing any words. All of those words were given to you by externally communicating with other people, right? So it's a shared sort of um, tool that's given to you by others to use. But you're thinking private thoughts only in terms of these words. So there's a connection there that's made where even though your neural operating system is functioning in in a sort of isolated fashion,
Right.
what it uses to do that with is entirely coming entirely from what you would call an ether of the sense horizon. You know, like
Right.
beyond, like it's coming in through the signals through senses.
Yes, and
And
we can more physically see that, or understand it as happening, in that you take the baby or whatever, the child who doesn't know any words yet, they are receiving impressions through their senses up through this stack, like from
Mhm.
physical, biological, neurological, and then I guess it gets fuzzy as to what exactly is happening as the next few layers start to do something, but
Right,
it's coming out of this horizon.
there would be like impulses generated by the mere incidental shape of the neural system, right? And from what this is
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm no authority on this at all, but from what I gather, during that phase, it's kind of like it's sitting in a very disorganized flux, just to be able to sort of heuristically make sense out of which patterns being fit to it,
Right.
so it can massage out something out of them.
Mhm. And
So it's just
by firing
anticipating
together
it.
and wiring together, right?
Yeah,
Like so
so
you
it has
hear
like
the
anticipation state or something to that effect.
you hear a certain voice and you very quickly associate that with your mother, right? And that's like part of you, something you want, right? So you're paying very close attention when that particular shape, it becomes a symbol to you, right? Or however you
Well,
would say
there's
that.
also like inbuilt, like pleasure sensors. For instance, smell receptors would be tuned to genetic information, stuff like that. Like, I mean, again,
Sure.
this is more speculation on my part,
No, I'm sure it's
um,
yeah. There's a lot
but
of built in.
I'll say this outright, so we don't make any mistake about what I'm saying.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's what it seems to me is that the body will have enough information in it from the genetics that build it up to sort of be tuned to some already be pre-tuned to some of these. We
Yeah.
already have a bootstrap of
Yes.
a
Basics.
minimal bootstrap.
Mhm.
To cry when you need help, to follow faces as a thing, to grab with your hand when you're just like and never let go. There's a whole bunch of built-in things, right? That don't necessarily stay. Like they could potentially get weeded out through changes in
Sure.
the neural network, but there at least there's a few common things
Mhm.
that we know of.
Yeah, of course. And there's weird stuff like touching something hot, and before it even hits your brain, your muscles are already like reacting to that, right?
Yeah, like there's another processing quote unquote unit sitting in the spine for that.
Wild.
Yeah, totally. Uh, well, distance makes sense because of distance. Your nervous system is time based mechanism.
Sure. That's pretty quick, but
So, what should we move on to now, given that we've sort of covered a couple of explanations?
so
We have the hero's journey, which is relevant in the sense that that's what goes through the layers, but I don't know if I want to get into
no,
now. Too abstract.
maybe even we could just review that other the archetype stacks,
This,
or not that one. Although we will, I think we'll get into that. Also, the ones at the top, the brain diagram and all that. I
yep.
think because we touched on those before, and I think it's really interesting.
Right. So this is so now now that we've seen the layers, I see what you're saying. Now that we've seen those layers, we want to say, okay, we have all these layers, we have all these things inside those layers. What does that mean? How does it all come together? And this is really what
Mm-hmm.
this is really what this is supposed to actually talk about. So we have the signal over here, symbol, artifact, mean, type, object. So those are all those relevant layers that we're talking about. We don't cover below signal, and we don't cover above object. And we basically cover layers from 4 to 9, leaving the horizons, the biological horizon, and the sort of like the social environment horizon to a different discussion.
Mm-hmm.
The new diagram is really talking about how these layers become a social horizon, what happens in the social horizon. So that's like the entire machinery to generate and project it and make it something actually real, as opposed to just a concept, which is itself a weird reality. So.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what this diagram is for, and it's called Mapper. It really is about how one becomes the next, becomes the next, becomes the next, becomes the next. It's not perfect. There's a few things that aren't covered in other diagrams, like canvas and selection and direction and all of that.
Right.
Not sure if there's any benefit in covering that right now, unless we're going to go deep into this process.
It's okay. That's interesting though. The canvas, it just reminds me of the what do you call them in Buddhism, like the marks of consciousness?
Perception.
Or the gates of
the aggregates. That's
right.
actually where they came from. So we're looking at
Right.
consciousness, we're looking at form, we're looking at feeling. That's affect here.
Mm-hmm.
So form, feeling, perception, fabrication is like where you get all these things.
Right.
It's really it really is originated from that line of thinking to begin with, and then the whole thing becomes consciousness.
So this diagram is kind of showing how the some of the various ways that we fall into the delusion of a self, of consciousness, of feeling that of being tricked
of
into
solidarity,
reality.
of having a solidarity to it. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
This sort of like it is just always networked together like a solid.
Yeah.
That it seems like a solid thing. I mean, where's the starting point of this diagram? The answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean? Like,
it has started. Yes.
But where? Yes.
Right.
Exactly. So that's the difficulty with it as well. That doesn't have that kind of clean cut starting point. And then of course affect being its own separate thing.
Right.
Recall the memeplex that we just saw is coming from here. This is like the meme part of it, right? So we're talking about the we're talking about this little thing,
Right.
this one, the meme bubble.
Mm-hmm.
This is what this is, the whole thing. And then we have the empathy and sympathy being representative of that proximity complex thick line.
Right.
This is that. This is the same as that. That's the same isomorphism bubble that we saw in the big diagram.
Yep.
So all of this is those things are these things, and dysmorphism just means it's not there, right? It just means like this set of artifacts coming in from the APS doesn't necessarily involve awareness of any of this
Right.
happening, and so it can't really see how to do it, how to go about not doing that. And
Right.
from that, you get your so from the artifacts that you do end up having without the interjection of an isomorphic model, the sense of self, conceitedness, which is really it's not something again mystical. It's just a comparison of the sympathy and empathy cycle, right? And given it kind of like a reality. It's not just the calculation of where am I next to this, but also this kind of thing takes that I out of that calculation and says, oh, that's also a thing, right? It
Right.
just injects it, and
Yeah.
in this
It's the second arrow. It
right.
adds a pain on top of the pain that one feels from things happening.
Exactly. And but the point
Or a
being there
pleasure
is
or a
that
neutralness.
if we were to go by this modeling of it, it's making it very clear that this generated I is generated. It's virtual. It's not to be taken seriously. It's simply taken that object and given it a stance of same, better, or worse.
Right. And
Right?
that's
And
not to say
then
that we don't navigate that we navigate without as some sort of ego type structure. It's just that that's not what's being driving everything in this attached clinging state. Right. You still have
exactly.
a self. You have a locus of experience and all
Yeah,
this.
and it's and I'm basically saying, yeah, sure, it's virtual, but it's not unreal. It's not an unreal, like the sense of I is not an unreal thing, in the same sense that, like you hear some mystic talk about how there is no I, and you're like, what the fuck are you talking about? I don't understand. How could it
Mm-hmm.
possibly be true? Well, this is a way to show that it's not exactly what is being meant here. It's not a matter of taking something and say, hey, this
Yeah.
doesn't scientifically exist or something like that. No, it
Yeah.
exists,
Exactly.
but
Yeah.
not in the sense that people think usually.
Mm-hmm. It's
And
yeah.
the reason for that being is, well, this is our explanation for that reason. So we have empathy and sympathy moving into conceitedness being as a mistaken for a true existent thing, out of which pain and pleasure drive the better and worse scenarios or sameness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And with that, we have the callousness, aversion, and attachment being the narrative counterpoints where, like you tell yourself you want to avoid something, you tell yourself you want something to be more of, or to stay somewhere, or you just don't give a shit about something. Like it doesn't start to factor into anything in particular
Mm-hmm.
that you would want to deal with.
Right.
And all of that actually points to the fact that this isn't something to be averse of, because, first of all, just by the diagram itself, if you are averse to it, you are here, right? And if you are averse to it, you're feeding it. You're quite literally.
Where did you point when you said you are here? Oh,
Can you
version.
see?
Right. Right.
Yeah,
On the right
it's
side.
on.
Yeah.
It's on the. It's part of doing this.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to be averse to being conceited, right?
Of course, yeah. The many, many weird, strange traps that we get into on the journey.
Exactly. And so, but and the another part to it, if you have conceitedness aligned with an altruistic sort of, like you have an interjection of the model to tell you where empathy and sympathy really belong. This is where altruism is coming from. This isomorphism,
Mm-hmm.
right? See that? It's coming from the cycle of empathy and sympathy. The isomorphic variation of it has
Right.
altruism as a counterpart.
Mm-hmm.
That's how to read that. And so, but it can be attached to conceitedness, and if we have that, and conceitedness being a different making the empathy and sympathy proximity complex a real object, a real virtual object. If we have altruism, we're still feeding that dysmorphism bubble.
Do you
And
find it
so,
strange, just a meta comment on this diagram, there's no direct path from that the memeplex empathy sympathy to conceitedness. It has to pass through altruism. Is that
yeah,
you
I'm not
know?
entirely sure if that's a relic of me not realizing that, because
Right.
I had that in the back of my mind as I was speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's actually a good point to there probably should be an arrow, just like there is one with isomorphism,
Right.
or maybe one actually
Yeah,
from
from
here.
right there down to conceitedness pointing.
Yeah, you're correct. That's where it should be.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would actually have a clearer picture of what we're talking about.
Cool.
So yeah, there's that. See, these diagrams are not set in stone.
Yeah.
um,
I'll put a
definitely
note in the
they
chat
couldn't
about
be.
that.
And so yeah, I think this is it. We can touch on pleasure and pain being sort of like both the
What's the name of this chart diagram? Empathy sympathy complex.
this would just be affect.
The affect, right? Yeah.
This is what affect feeds into the system, and how it drives the narratives of attachment, aversion, and callousness, which are the narrative counterparts to this abstraction or signalic almost combination of things. So yeah, once you get these narratives, they feed back into the dysmorphism, and let's backtrack to why you don't want to be averse to any of this. So for one, you'd be basically back to square one every time you try. But more to the point, it's actually how we survive, and let me sort of elaborate why that is the case. Dysmorphism is not a bad word. Dysmorphism simply means that something doesn't match something else. It doesn't map to it. And when it comes to being a living creature on this planet, for example, a lot of our uh, decisions are driven by disconnect from how we want things to be to how things are. And some of it is absolutely natural. For
Mm-hmm.
instance, hunger. Like your body needs sustenance. It's telling you signals that you need that it's uncomfortable. It comes across as pain. Pain moves you somewhere, right? It's a survival mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
Same with pleasure. Pleasure is a signal to stay. It's telling you that that you can relax, you can rest, you can like you don't have to engage your fight or flight right now. You can sort of ease into more. Uh, your autopilot does not have to be on edge. Basically, it can daydream and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. Which is essentially a state of rest, a state of recuperation, and a state of putting things back together after you've engaged with them energetically, right? Kind of like actual sleep, but not sleep. So all of this is great and natural, and not necessarily bad in any capacity. So dysmorphism is necessary for survival. We get into trouble when we apply it to things that don't have anything to do with it. Um, Things like money problems, things like reputation, things like things that don't need
Mm-hmm.
to be there due to just if people didn't engage in overthinking these things, they wouldn't really matter.
Well,
And
we've been
they
kind
don't.
of driven into anxiety, though.
Right. No, this is like the point I'm trying to make is that in its original form, if you will, it's all normal. But
Mm-hmm.
in its current form, in the current plateau, if you will, of commodification, the only thing that seemed to be working is the right side of this diagram, with altruism in the
Mm-hmm.
picture as a sort of an artifact of pleasure, right?
Hmm.
Altruism is used to induce a sense of pleasure,
Right. And
but
there's conceitedness in that.
yeah, like but it's used through this framework of conceitedness, and
Mm-hmm.
because of that, it's always landing in attachments, and it's always landing in aversions
Yeah.
otherwise. And so pain is used as punishment, really, reward and punishment being the key factors in why this whole complex is constantly coming back to this side of the diagram with it, right? It's never, and why these two things, well, isomorphism itself is basically eradicated in a sense of artificial. The artifacts created are being ejected out of the system for efficiency purposes, right? Because they tax the system time-wise. And the detachment is actually vilified.
Right. Yeah, I feel like this has probably a large role to play
And
in the
therefore detachment is sorry, like, let me just finish that thought.
yeah.
Detachment is vilified and punished through pain.
Right.
There's that hook that you have for perpetuating the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was just saying, like, I think it seems like this to me obviously has a large role to play in this kind of like, I don't know if you'd call it the zeitgeist or whatever, this kind of emergent like let's um, um, have decentralization and peer-to-peer networking and community and all that kind of stuff. You can't have that if you're stuck in these conceitedness cycles where everything you do is based on this machine logic of pleasure and pain, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a very lucrative trap, because again, if we look at the attachment and aversion and callousness expansion of this, all right, this is like the narrative version. So now not only do you have those reactions, right? Now they're connected with narratives. Now, what are those narratives? Well, since we've taken isomorphism out of the pictures, they're not going to be about this, right? Since we are vilifying detachment um, and punishing it through pain, the way that they're going to come across in these attachments and in these aversions, all right, they're going to be like, okay, we got to destroy people that do that. We got to promote people that are very attached. We
Right.
we throw everything else into our callousness wastebasket and sort of neglect everything else. And this is where dysmorphism can come into the archetype stacks, where with neglect, right? Like the
Right.
isomorphism on those fronts is judged basically through what's there, what's missing. And this is pointing to the narratives that would do that. And so with attachments and aversions, you sort of eradicate isomorphism and detachments. And if you don't end up seeing it artificially, if you don't end up injecting the model into this to see the other side of it, it's going to continue to happen.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to take maybe like a 5 minute break, something like that?
Please.
And before we do that, where should we go next? Do you think? What chart should we maybe touch on? I wanted to get into the kind of like this corporate structure thing, but
I
I
think
feel
that's where
like
we'll go next, actually.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, we'll go here. You can't see
And
that, sorry.
right before we do that, we may want to just touch on the archetype stacks chart again, just to I don't know how to see how this all relates in. Maybe it doesn't directly.
Um,
No, 'cause just
it does,
as a
but
review even.
we don't need them specifically outside of trying to maybe illustrate again how these chief
Right.
officers and
Yeah.
how these governance and office and department positions
So
are mirroring that.
it's like, where did this all come from? And basically,
Right.
it's a gradient between chaos and order. That's how we are organizing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we
Yeah,
can
everything has to do with that.
touch that
And
quick. So let's call it, say, like 5 minute break or something like that.
yeah, I gotta feed little ones and stuff like that as it is. It's five
Okay.
o'clock, so
Is 5 minutes enough, or maybe 10?
yeah, everything's prepared. I just gotta heat it up.
Okay. Cool. So I'll be back in 5 anyways. Something like that.
Okay. Ping me on Telegram, I guess.
Yeah, I'm gonna put the stream on mute here. Cool. So we'll see you soon.
Yep.
unmute us. I think we're unmuted. Do a little test there.
Hello, hello, hello,
Okay.
hello.
Cool. We back in business. Yeah. All right. Okay. So we were
Yeah.
just saying that the affect, it was cool to go over that affect chart again because the corporate structure we are uh, um, discussing is not possible without that type of self-development.
Well, the corporate structure is essentially about that self-development if you look at what social responsibility is, right? So that's
Okay.
kind of goes into saying that the reward and punishment system that this corporation actually brings to the table, because of its acknowledgement of the original model to begin with, including that affect chart, including being aware of the cycle, right, as part of its own sort of makeup. Because of that alone, it actually reverses what it rewards and what it punishes, in a sense, right? It flips it upside down in this, from the perspective that you don't. It does the narratives that it perpetuates to attachments to would be the ones that contain the model, whereas the ones that
Right.
it'll start to be sort of aversive to is the ones that don't contain it and or contain things to its detriment.
And
Right?
do we like signify that under this social responsibility sheet?
No, it's only stated in the
How
positive sense.
let's try to draw that connection. How do we actually connect from that? Like how does the corporation actually um, select for altruism, whatever?
Well, but first of all, having the model as its product, right? The social responsibility and the scope of operations. So, how the scope of operations is what it does, and the social responsibilities and what trajectory to do it in, right?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So by
Right.
having that, like by having this,
Okay, so
as
wait. We have to back up a little bit. So this corporate structure we're describing is not necessarily the description of of what a single or even a template for what a corporation could look like in a peer-to-peer type environment, but this is like we have to step back and see it as more like this is the corporation, because any corporation that you have within this paradigm, within this model, is going to automatically cooperate with other corporations within this model as if they are like with an empathic response, as if you are
it's
part
gonna
of
be
the
it's gonna become a self-extension. Yeah.
right. So all corporations under this model appear as self extensions of two other corporations.
Yeah. Right. And if we want to solve the peer-to-peer problem, I think from within is the way to go.
Right? Yeah, obviously.
This is where you get to having the model being injected as an artifact, a document that you're going to be utilizing on top of what you're already doing.
Mm-hmm. So our kind of stance within this, within what we're going to try and describe here, is that let's say we let let's say there's an environment of mixed corporation types or whatever, and say Jenny and I actually register a corporation to the state, to the existing state system, which is say like a facilitation, an educational type organization which helps companies to move towards this type of a model. Um, yeah.
Basically, yes, that's one type of corporation that this could facilitate. So that's
Mm-hmm.
the consultancy.
Right, and we're
Um,
thinking of how to bridge to the existing structures and to the state. But what's emergent here as a product is sort of the corporation, or the guild as we've called it.
Well, it's two sides of, again, the same coin. The guild is an abstraction from the model's perspective, while the corporate is from the system's perspective. And in terms of the system, and it has it's
Hmm.
framed as a legal entity, basically.
Right. Right. Right.
That's how you make it appeal to the system, or appear part of the system to begin with.
So like us having a product, quote unquote, um, like we do have something to offer um, in a way that would be traditionally recognized as a corporation, a training structure, is say a sort of a platform type of company who is connecting companies together. Um,
Yes.
I'm just trying to think of how this pieces together. Um,
Okay,
so
so
that's sort of separate from what we want to describe generically here as what's emergent as this type of corporate structure that we're trying to facilitate. So that's, I think, the main topic of what we're doing. We're probably not going to get into what like what we specifically want to do as raising a corporation in our product, but we will be talking about. I think we'll be getting into the dashboard hopefully, as something that yes we could develop and.
yeah, in a way, a dashboard is quote unquote the product, in a way that this is the corporation itself. It's like
Mhm.
it has many different forms.
Yeah, so it's kind of a little bit mixed up, but
We'll get there.
yeah.
Got to start somewhere. I think the more important parts are the organizational part, things that bring that product together. Since the two are really two sides of the same coin, right? This
Hmm.
organization is for that product. The product is needs to for this organization.
Right. Hmm. And any type of corporation that's going to emerge out of this structure is going to be using or utilizing something that looks like what we're going to describe as this dashboard.
Right. It's not going to necessarily use the same words. It's not necessarily going to use the same breaking points, because that's not necessary. What's necessary is to include it all. It's kind of, again, for us, at least from the perspective of the model, it will be an all or nothing game, because if it isn't, if that model is quirky or you know wrong, it'll start again to reward and punish the wrong things, and
Right.
with that, it always is a runaway process.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
always difficult to stop once it gets going too far.
That's why I
It's,
mentioned training.
and it's kind of funny, because it's sort of like the proverbial Morpheus statement. Or some minds are too, they're
Right.
not
Too
ready to be
too far
unplugged.
gone or whatever.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I'm drawing this as a kind of a funny sort of observation.
We'll expect that. We'll encounter that, but I suspect that, and because intuitively, I'm kind of seeing this as emergent. We're sort of describing something that's already happening, typical, right? But that kind of gives us the power to expect that what we're doing is highly like mimetically contagious. The idea of mimetic medicine. Many people are kind of dancing around these descriptions and these types of structures and organizational structures, but are
Right.
they very few I think are actually approaching the core of it, um, into this whole package, the whole package.
Yeah, like the chaos model,
Yeah.
mythology entirely.
Hmm. Yep. So, where do you think we should start then? Go through the offices or the
Well,
dashboard?
no, I think it makes more sense to, first of all, yeah, since we're kind of touching on big picture stuff, and this being a meta corporation and having a meta product kind of deal,
Right.
I think we should actually demonstrate some of the consequences of that. And here, we're going to draw attention to this diagram. Sorry, messed that up. Share screen. here we go. So this is the model view of our corporation, and by that what we mean. Um, the concern of the framework
Right.
is slightly different. So corporations' concern is, shareholders, profit, um, crossing T's, dotting I's with the legal departments, all that jazz. On this front, actually, is like, well, this is actually both the corporation itself and the product that it is selling, right? The guild, the model, the guild, the archetype of the model and the guild.
Right.
And in this view, this is kind of like from that perspective. It's from that perspective of, okay, now we have all these different bunch of corporations, and maybe even corporate coalitions, if you will, working together, selling this product internally, right? So what's that product internally? That's kind of like this side of the. Each one carries their own, as you can see. Each circle encompasses this kind of fundamental, natural, and proximal thing
Right.
internally. And so this is a different variations of our product being carried around by each individual, what we call
This
guild.
this is also a very kind of old diagram, and it's kind
Yeah,
of a little bit difficult maybe to see or understand what it is. But this is more, I think, more when we say model, this is more towards the experience somebody may have of being a member of multiple different organizations.
yeah,
Um,
that's one way to look at it. Yeah,
right.
and not look at it as a set of things concrete set in stone, but rather it's like
Right.
it's incidental to the moment.
And in flux, yeah. So we can see in the top left there we have a label called loop back, and that's pointing to the dot. So each dot is kind of representing an individual, if you will. And you can see that some individuals are members of multiple of these groupings. And so each grouping, that the squiggly lines that contain a bunch of things, they each have this fundamental um, natural and proximal guild structure to it. So that's kind of the structure to get from that we can be part of multiple guilds, and that a guild can have multiple individuals in it. And this is just a sort of a map of just a bunch of relationships, basically, people caring about different things.
All right. And then we can kind of see that if we blow up one of these structures that they're carrying around with them, the fundamental, natural, and proximal guild over here,
Mm-hmm.
we can see that this proximal box is actually the box denoting the whole map of the natural guilds. Right, so there's like a mapping of everything that's going on in this within each individual um, cell of it, if you will. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So each one has its own
Right.
shared
Yes.
view
And
of this entire
so
structure.
we've just evoked the strange loop, basically, in saying that your proximity is calculating a whole bunch of the proximity, a whole bunch of different guilds.
Right, then you carry that as a mapping within your internal natural stack, if you will, or it's part of your fundamental stack actually, of which natural and fundamental are also members of. A long-winded to say is that this part this part we're representing in this diagram with the fundamental, the natural, and the proximity.
Right. Yeah, I know you're muted for a second there.
Yeah, and so this is all to just say that this box that we're looking at that's found inside of each one of these, if we take this encompassing circles to now represent corporations, then this part of the structure maps directly to this dashboard. And so as each corporate entity is carrying a dashboard product, it's actually the parallel image and guild dynamics of carrying them.
Right. Right. Okay, so here what we're saying is that in order for multiple individuals to connect and communicate with each other, they need a shared set of artifacts. In other words, something that's being carved into the environment via media or whatever, and that's what's helping them to coordinate with each other, and we call that a dashboard.
Right. And then again, this dashboard has a particular shape, which here we see as a conversation, a social, an accounting framework, database. So, and now each one of these, like these are abstract ideas. They originate from a concept of making it into software, but we've quickly realized that there is a whole bunch of different mediums in which this can take place.
Right.
So so this is where we get the idea where the product is actually a kind of a meta product in which it can take multiple different expressions. And as long as the organizational structure and the product itself follow this to a specific threshold, I would say, then what we have is actually the former picture where you have a network of these guilds working together, legally called corporations, but model speak wise, they are the guild of the archetypes, and the archetypes serving as this structure of corporate organization.
I think I almost processed what you just said.
I'm just jumping between how those two are mirror images. So if we think of this as taking care of the fundamental guilds, right? Then this package is the DNA, just like it is in the other picture. And if we take this to be, if we take the whole thing to be like each one of these circles that connects a bunch of dots together, with this being the core that each one represents, then we have the same picture.
Dashboard as fundamental guild? Is that kind of what you're parallel?
It represents, hold on, it represents this. Oh, come on. Oopsie. It represents this, right? So this would be one corporation.
Right.
And this would be one dashboard within that.
Mm-hmm.
This would be another corporation.
Right.
Dashboard.
I thought you were pointing to the sub parts, like the metatext database, the accounting.
Well, they're used to manage it. So that one dashboard would manage this part, one dashboard would manage that part, right?
Okay, and can you
could start
relate
breaking it
those,
apart.
though?
What's that?
So go back to that
Heuristically.
other chart. I can't remember what it is. What it said there. The Excel. So we have 4 parts of that dashboard: conversation engine, social network, accounting framework.
So this would be your. So this would be, if we were to look at it from guild perspectives, proximity is probably with that. Incidental conversations, with the metatext database being like the within counterpart, so individuals. So this would be the loopback, where everything is stored. Right?
Hold on. Sorry, I'm just trying to do something else.
It's a pretty convoluted isomorphism, so don't get too hung up on it. It's not.
Yeah, I kind of
conversation.
suspected as much. It just sounded like you were trying to relate them.
They're related
more
in that
concretely.
this is a representation of that, an implementation, software-wise, of keeping track of all that. So every time you're inside one of those circles with the fundamental guilds inside of it, the dashboard is is where you have your schedule, basically. Do this next, do this next, do this next, do this next, do this next. Right? The metaphor being is that you're driving it through this dashboard like a car being driven through steering wheel and pedals.
Right.
Rather than manipulating the wheel, like going outside and using your hands to twist the axle or something.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at with the dashboard as a metaphor
Yeah.
product.
Right.
And that's why the game works, because it serves that purpose. So that's why yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So as long as that's in, it's going to keep track of the natural guilds, the proximal guilds network, through being, like the social network itself. The metatext database will contain natural guild information out of which everything is working, and provide for
Right. Yeah. I think that's probably the link that I was looking for.
and then provide for mechanisms to increase the isomorphisms that way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where you have it in terms of the meta organization and the meta product and its relationship to the guild dynamics and everything we've been talking up until this point in terms of the model.
Cool.
Yeah, so there's lots of loopbacks going on. There's like the fact that it's another representation of the abstract space itself, despite being a guild facilitator sort of protocol. Yeah, it's pretty involved.
Oh, definitely. Okay, so it's great that we brought up that chart about the guild, the proximity guilds and all that. With in relation to dashboard, we haven't really, we haven't like we could dive into the different sections of the dashboard here, or we could go into the offices. We have probably more charts. I'm not really sure where we should go to kind of expand this out.
I would actually go for this for explaining the structure of that.
Right? And so we can expand this by saying, even within a corporation, you're gonna have different individuals taking different roles or different domains, you could say. As
Hmm.
we go up and down the list here, life cycle management, real estate, asset management, all these things could be seen as again different proximity guilds, which are bound together by a dashboard, right?
Absolutely. In fact, that's how you should view it.
Mm-hmm.
Like from the corporate perspective, like yeah, these are the makeup of that those are corporate organs, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Right.
they do not function on their own. They cannot function on their own.
Of course.
They have to be part of this whole corporate body.
And again, because this is the stratum between chaos and order, and
Yeah,
that's kind of like the basis of our structure here.
yeah.
Um,
Value proposition is essentially a direct answer to okay, uncertain circumstances. Okay, so if the circumstances are uncertain, value proposition would have to be something along the lines of okay, well, how do we deal with said uncertainty in terms of some kind of certainty,
mm-hmm.
right? How do we inject some kind of order into this chaos? And this is the answer to that. Like this, the entire
Right.
idea here is to get from one end to the other,
Mm-hmm.
and to do that in such a way that doesn't actually reverberate back into more chaos, instead of basically offsetting
Right.
the entropy that happens through the functioning.
Yeah, and so each organ is basically, we're going to see the structure again, where each organ tries to take care of each other organ, which is a weird kind of loopy thing.
Yeah, and more to the point of entropy, we don't want to make the point that we're trying to control chaos ultimately, and transform it all into order. That's not what the main
Mm-hmm.
some of the main goal is. It's simply what to do in the face of chaos, in the face of
Right.
and how to work with what you have in a way that makes sense, rather than just to give a throw your hands up and say it can't be done, or b um, sort of start grinding way up against it until it eats you alive. So it's kind of striking that balance
Or a
between
solution is achieved.
which, given again entropy and the susceptibility of
Yeah.
attachment and all of that
Oh,
stuff.
we could get into the heat death of the universe and all that.
Yeah, let's just say it's harder said than done. Easier said than done. Wow, I can't
Right.
even speak.
Yeah.
If I can't even speak, then doing it is that much harder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't know if we have a clear picture for everything here, but I have some idea. The board of directors we covered last time being representations of space-time management, essentially.
Right. So, I guess we should. I don't know if we have like, or how much time or whatever. We could go down the stack, up or down the stack or whatever, and just maybe give a brief description of each organ. I guess it.
You know what? I don't see actually the value of going into that detail for an org.
Right.
What I do see a value in is drawing some distinctions between the different products that could be happening.
Right. Go for
So,
it.
the actually you should start, because the easiest one is the game of cards, and that is actually a very great, interesting platform if we want to transform it into a sort of a consultancy. Right, like, so that's the connection I want to maybe you could talk to
Mhm.
that game as to how it would facilitate this conversation network of counting framework and as a database.
Right. Okay.
You
So
don't have, you don't
before
have to
we
be all
do
detailed.
that, then that's okay. So I've been trying to figure out how to actually bridge this um, to the game, the card box game or whatever we want to call it. Um, the specifics are uh, difficult, but if we can go into the dashboard more, I don't know if like I like the idea. I think going over the dashboard, like what is the conversation engine, what is the social network, what is the accounting framework, what is the metatext database. We can try and translate that into index card format.
Well, it works very well in conjunction with the other diagram that we saw about guild dynamics.
Right.
So a conversation engine, we've talked about this before. So conversation engine is a lot like what you see in chat. So my mind is very much software oriented, so that's kind of where I'm coming from at this description. We imagine a kind of a chat, except here's the problem I see as chat and why they don't represent what we do as people. A chat seems to be set around the idea of having a kind of a permanent communications channel, like a wire between two locations, right? And those locations and the wire, they're static. They're sitting there underground, kind of thing. The wire sits on the ground, the whatever. Metaphor.
Right, and you have a log which takes a time based. This message was received. Now this message was received, and you get
Right.
a string of messages over time. Period.
Right.
That's all it is.
And so the chat is actually like the lifetime of the chat is the lifetime of this wire between the two entities, right? That's one to one in terms of.
Right.
You can throw groups into this, but the idea remains still the same in that it's the channel is the connection. It's the wiring of the two things. So it's like it's not the two things doing something. It's how they are represented by an intermediary network.
Right. So we want to be able to, for one, pick out individual conversations as well as
Yeah.
tagging. Right.
Yeah. So the idea is to sort of take that idea of chatting, saying one thing to somebody, or somebody's, in plural, and sort of like capture a context around that called the conversation. So, you get kind of like interesting things with that. In that, for instance, you and I, being two of exactly the same two people, we could have multiple conversations with each other,
Mm-hmm.
right? All at the same time. Another feature that chat would be missing, but this is allowing for, is conversations end. There's a distinct beginning and an end
Right.
to a conversation, and then so one conversation is not another conversation, but it could
Mm-hmm.
be. Um,
Right.
so there's like all of these different dynamics between what conversations are versus what chats are.
Yeah, so let's walk through. So we are we are going basically through so conversation engine. This is um, if we can apply triad protocol here, and this is going back to the neural OS. The conversation engine as shared layer, social network as concrete, correct?
Yep,
Accounting as
abstract.
abstract, and then memetic as the metatext. So
Exactly.
I think it would be neat to kind of walk through each one of these and see like how does what is the space here that we're looking at. And
Another angles of ingress also feed into some of this,
right,
because
um,
you have personal, relational, um, right? Personal conversations, relational networks, practical accounting, and intellectual
right,
data.
right, yeah. So again, so we're getting into the temperaments thing. So when we describe each one of these four things,
Ingress,
one of
ingress.
them is going to, right, temperament as being a more understood term
Okay,
related to ingress. But as we describe each one of these four, probably most people are going to feel comfortable with one or two of them. And the
exactly.
other two are not going to make any sense, or why would you even care about it? So we're going to try walk through all four. And
Well, we
yeah,
have to walk through all four because each, from our perspective, each one actually contains the others, just
right,
not necessarily in a clear-cut way.
right. And we've struggled to try and extend ourselves into those uncomfortable areas to the point where we can kind of see a whole picture of what's going on here.
Yeah,
So the
and
interesting
also get
thing,
yelled at.
oh yeah, lots of that. Something came to mind about the conversation engine. There's a commodification process going on in
Mhm.
that a conversation, if it's what's happening is so you have a conversation and it turns out you talked about, say, a mechanics of a car, fixing a car or something like that. So kind of after the fact, you're going to be tagging that with metadata such that in the future when you're looking at how to fix this part of a car, if that's been tagged properly, this conversation should be able to come up, and this conversation should um, kind of bleed into the abstractions of okay, you talked about the engine, you talked about the piston, right, like these abstract parts of the car. When you point to those abstract parts, you should say, okay, you'll see within the system. This is if it's like computerized and calculated and all that. You click on it, you see a piston and an engine or whatever. You click on it and you see, okay, these conversations talked about an engine, right? And this is the commodification process that we're expecting to see through the dashboard, correct?
Yep.
Hmm. So it's kind of
Yep.
making use of what people talk about, assuming there was a high coherence and that people were recognizing that coherence. And
So this is where you get into accounting, actually.
the people who are judging that coherence have a reputation. If they have a high reputation in mechanics, what they say as a good mechanics conversation about engines, you're going to trust that that is a good conversation about engines, right?
Right, and their reputation are going to be in direct relationship to your own activities as well. Like if you constantly find somebody who is the public at large finds coherent and you don't, right? That's also going to affect it. So
Right.
it's kind of
Yeah.
so it's not
True.
just so I can't be an authority on my own coherence to everybody.
Yep. Yep. And
That's sort of
there's a distance of trust. This is the web of trust,
yeah.
which is a very very
Here,
key component to peer-to-peer
yeah.
networking and all that.
Yeah, it's and in this case, it's a heuristic, and it's an ongoing heuristic, and basically, trust becomes really the name of the game, in that you are starting to use this model to assert, you know, um, whether anything else is going to move towards it isomorphically or not, and basically you're making your trust coherent level trust based on that path. Yeah, I'm probably not explaining it very well, but
I wasn't paying enough attention either, so that kind of all flew over my head.
that's okay.
But
It's not the most
I
important
was
thing.
thinking maybe we could take another quick five, and then we got about another hour. Is that's right?
More like a half, I would
Half
say.
hour.
Yeah, I
Okay,
got actually. You know what? I might have to end it later. I got laundry and stuff.
that's about it, eh?
Yeah. So
Cool.
unless we wanna like do a couple of more points before we wrap up,
Yeah,
maybe.
let's just give it like 5 minutes then. That's fine. Um, and I think we should try to walk through this dashboard. Um, I don't perfectly understand how it looks or should look or what goes on.
Well,
It's
I've shown you pictures. Mhm.
right as far as the software goes. Yep.
Yeah.
So
So,
let's continue. So we've described a bit about the conversation engine. Is there anything we didn't touch upon that or its functionality? Can we move on to social network and how that's differentiated?
yeah, social network is who you can pick conversations with, right?
Right.
Like, how do you obtain somebody to converse with?
Mm-hmm.
Because in its quote unquote primordial state, this dashboard, the only person you're talking to is yourself. Um, which is
Right.
parallel to your thought process, right? The first words that come the first person to hear your own words is you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like related to that.
Okay, so
Yes.
let's quickly. I think we can probably squeeze this in. Let's just introduce quickly. So the idea of the database. So we're having a database here, which is keeping track of all these dashboard components, whatever is contained within the dashboard, and we're including conversations and people, identities, all this kind of stuff, tagging.
Yeah.
Each one we are saying can be represented by, say, a card, an index card. So this is going
Including the dashboard itself.
right. This is going full low tech, as kind of a concept. So with the conversation engine, we would say like, let's say as part of a conversation, I want to add a reply. So that reply is a card. It's represented by an entry in a database. In other words, it's a card. So that
So
database could be
just to
your
point out,
mhm.
that's more like the accounting framework in the sense that we've made a record of that thing in the card.
Right.
In the database layer, not only do you have a card, but also rules associated with it as to what happens within the context of the rest of the dashboard once that in relationship to that card existence or having a lifetime.
Right.
So
Um,
it's also going to respond to it.
so is that then incorrect that that we could um, say
It's
put a
it's almost
message into
correct.
a card?
Yeah, so that would be the accounting framework. I know it sounds a little bit more convoluted because you're probably thinking accounting as only being recording,
Now, here,
monetary values, but in this case, accounting is accounting of coherence, and so we're
right
creating
on top of the thing.
yeah, so we're
Okay,
creating a piece of coherent piece of data.
that's fine. Now, for us communicating and talking like just you and me right now, I wouldn't assume that every word I speak has to be on a card, right?
No,
And then
no,
give you the card.
this is where the conversation engine abstraction comes into play, and it manages what kind of cards get generated by a
Right.
conversation.
Okay, yeah. And so we're seeing cards in the accounting framework then basically.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And
I know that doesn't make initial intuitive sense why that's
now,
the case.
so even though the talking may not, the specific communication messages may not be recorded in cards themselves, and each sentence or whatever back and forth, but the fact that a conversation happened on this date, you may record that in a card.
Right.
Correct.
And each message could be recorded in the card if you want.
You could, sure, or points.
Yeah, simply so that well, they already are by the fact that, if we have a string of them, then we already have differentiated messages.
Right.
So they're all going to be cards as it is, and then the conversation card would be like one that groups them all together with a beginning
Yes.
and an end and a coherent value.
Okay, so I think you're
Uh,
saying what I was saying, though. I think.
yep, yep. They're going to be translatable.
Yeah, within the dashboard database, which takes care of keeping track of everything that happens within the system, anything can be considered a card.
Right.
Any event, a grouping of events or whatever.
Well, you look at any layer, like anything can be considered a conversation, anything can be considered a network connection, and anything can be considered a card, anything
Right.
can be considered a response to a situation.
Cool. So moving up then to this social network, we would assume that you would have a card, like almost like a Rolodex, a card for each person. Each
Card
person
for
you
each
know.
person,
The different
a,
groups, each group that you're part of.
yeah,
Or,
a card for the whole network and its interrelationships, a card for, peering, a card for all these different things that bring together a proximal guild
right?
from a loopback.
Right. And then when we're getting into accounting, this is where I'm seeing a lot of the content. I think, um, in that you're pulling out abstractions from a bunch of different things, and you're kind of really tying a lot
Yeah.
of stuff together.
Yeah, this is where the building happens. This is where the people make their Lego pieces, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And make the pieces and share the pieces, the types of piece. This is a type of piece.
Yeah. So
Right.
if you have awesome conversations with great topics and you want to build something out of that, you can actually create a post out of them to get commentary a different way,
Right.
and then move from there to use that information to generate more abstract versions of the same thing.
Right.
Keep them all parallel and isomorphic
And so,
together.
like the engine example, you would have many conversations talking about engines, and even some conversations talking about pistons in particular, right? And what to do, and protocols of how to maintain um,
Yeah.
different parts of the engine, whatever.
Yeah, and those things would still get coherent scores through this accounting framework, and whatever is more coherent is quote unquote more trustworthy.
Right.
And so when it comes to, say, something like a contract, which this could also represent, right? When the card is a contract,
Mm-hmm.
so that the source is trustworthy, the coherence is trustworthy, the fulfillment, so you have high coherence there. You can also use coherence. What are you doing?
The example.
I can't see what it says.
It's an example. There's nothing on it. It's a blank card.
Oh, okay.
I'm just giving the example. Sorry.
Yeah, so what was I saying?
No idea.
Oh, great. Right. Oh, I was talking about like the example of a contract. So we have two parties that decided to trust each other. They find each other coherent, right? They have a high coherence score, so they want to
Right.
enter together into a contract. Now that contract can be given a coherence score in terms of fulfillment, right? And
Right.
all of that stuff.
Yeah, and then this kind of thing gets attached sort of to that person as a resume or whatever you could say.
Exactly, and the record of trust again, and
Yeah, the web of trust, all that kind of stuff. And this is necessary again for that kind of this emergent corporate structure where you feel like the other corporations are extensions of your corporation and it's just one big corporation. You
yeah,
need
and
the web of trust for that.
right. So, and you can get into actual accounting as we know it simply by saying that, simply by equating coherence with balance, right? If we have something balanced to zero, which you're supposed to
Right.
in the entire,
No issues on one side or the other.
right. So you don't have deficit where you're supposed to, or any of that stuff.
Right.
So if we equate coherence with balance, we can then bridge it into a more this kind of number into that kind of number, and work through actual, like, actual accounting as a framework attached to this more abstract accounting framework.
Hmm. Yep. Yep.
So
And so, do we want to move into metatext database at all? Do you want to speak on that? It's a little bit more, again, abstract, I think. It's
yeah,
more
it's the old idea
archetypal.
of a it's the old idea of having some data to work with, but why is it meta and text? Well, for one, we're relating texts together, and it comes from the idea of hypertext and links and all of that stuff. But more to that point is that we are looking at the data in which links only make sense certain ways in certain
In
contexts.
context. Hmm.
Yeah, so having a link is only part of the picture. We're also asking the question of, okay,
Where
we're
did you
having a
come
link.
from?
Where did we come from to
Hmm.
get here to look through those links to begin with, and where are you going with that in the first place? So having those bits, extra bits to it is what is giving it that meta, if you will,
Hmm.
connotation where you don't your links are sets of potentials,
Right. And
not
and what,
distinct pathways.
as if you're viewing a wiki, like a Wikipedia, but
Hmm.
what you're seeing on the page is kind of generated based on where you arrived, like how you arrived there.
Yeah, so clicking a link, me clicking a link from this one page is not the same as you clicking that link.
Right.
And coherence. So this database is to do that, but at the same time, it's also to make it hopefully non-confusing, because as you can probably imagine, it is going to run away from you real quick if you're not careful.
Right.
So on top of having that metatext database as a tool, it also has to be able to represent itself properly. So
Hmm.
there's a lot of loop backing going on into self-representation in this data dashboard.
Tricky. And I see that, like, for a software system, fine, but for a index card system, I find that very difficult to imagine how
Yeah,
how you would do
like
that.
like how half of it would have to sit in a person's head.
Yeah. Hmm. Cool. Well, I think we've probably um, explored that quite to satisfaction. I feel good about that. We didn't
Awesome,
quite get
awesome.
into this. I guess will be next week. We'll save it for next Sunday or Saturday or whatever.
What do
Um,
we get? What is this? Sorry.
what I'd like to do is actually lay out some cards. Actually, use
Okay.
the system, use the card system, and represent kind of what we just walked through by talking about it, but use actual concrete examples. For example, like organizing Portal Mountain. We'll say for whatever um, objective, we'll have example objectives or something like that, and just try to use this system, the different types of cards we can have, um, based on triad protocol, um, um, based on, like, protocol constraint, execution, and what's the other one, commitment. Like having these types of cards, kind of laying out what is this type of a card, what does it look like, how do you use it, how do they interrelate, how do they link up together, um, and when you, in the context of index cards, it becomes a little bit tricky um, when you want to, say, have a commitment card, a card representing a commitment, say, to fix your car, but then you also have constraint cards that are kind of the abstract um, cosmos of what's going on, what's being fixed, as well as the protocols that are linked to those constraints, to actually do the commitment, right, through
Right.
constraints.
So validation basically.
And yeah, so how does this all look when you're actually laying it out on a table?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that would be my ideal next session.
Okay. So that will be the game itself as product, right?
Yes, this is the card box game, or whatever you want to call it. Developing that, yeah, I'd love
Okay.
to get into it. And it'll apply to the autonomous organization software,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and all that. Yeah.
So here's my thinking. We do that. We run with it as far as we can go as a product, right?
Yep.
We then use that as the main springboard to now get into as to how would we form an actual corporation selling this product.
Sure, yeah.
And
And
then that
even
goes,
even use the product itself to bootstrap the organization that sells the product.
that's what I'm saying. That's exactly, that's literally what I'm talking about, is
Of
is to
course,
like
yeah.
bring it all together.
Yeah.
And this gives us an actual, exactly, bleh. This gives us an actual concrete example
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
of what the hell we've been mulling over about and how to bring it together,
Yep.
up to and including a product that goes right back into pulling the levers on the the neural OS that we've been discussing in the first meeting.
What do you mean by pull the levers?
So this dashboard, right, if you will, we're going to be injecting
Right.
that artifact
Hmm.
into the process, and that's going to cause, and because of its internal structure, to cause it
Right.
be formed into
Isomorphisms.
this narrative, that
Mm-hmm.
narrative, together into
Yes.
that hyper narrative, and
So
all that.
the if we can produce an instruction manual for this card box game, it should cause isomorphisms to happen just by saying, okay, do this, try that, and you'll sort of see, because the system should be isomorphic, right? This is a commitment, this is a constraint, this is what a protocol is.
Yeah, and this is sort of going to make it. This is basically will make it a pure land corporation.
A Buddhist term,
Pure land, yeah. It's like the devotional temperament.
right? Yeah, cool. All right, well, I look forward to that,
No,
Master
wait,
Zhenya.
sorry, not the pure land. Sorry, I'm dumb. It's going to be all Zen.
Oh, Zen. Of
Carry
course.
wood, chop wood, carry water type stuff. Do this card, do that card, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, the card system is definitely, like, I feel that as a pragmatic practice,
Yeah.
for sure. For sure.
Yep.
All right, buddy. Well, this was great. Once again, thank you for joining me. Let's try to make it next Sunday again and keep it going.
For sure.
Make
That was
something.
fun.
Make something of it.
Yeah, I might be actually able to show up in person next Sunday, so
Oh,
we'll
good.
see.
Good. It's much more fun over here. There's
I
less
guess.
screaming and feeding and all that.
Yeah. For me, it's a balancing act still.
Right. Life is life.
Yep.
Cool, buddy.
Yeah, man.
I will stop the stream then. And any final comments?
No, I think we have a good trajectory so far. Probably will eventually step into state matters and become governors and all that.
Statesman. Yeah.
Statesmen
course.
for all y'alls.
What else?
Natural logical step, right?
Yep.
So I'm just commenting that I think we have a solid direction to go forward in terms
sure.
of there's explanation. I like that we're getting into actual products, and
Mm-hmm.
who knows, maybe eventually we'll finish up that field manual.
Oh, it's coming.
Yep. Because it's a lot of it is relevant as to why everything is structured the way it is as well.
Yes, and how to actually teach somebody.
Yeah, so
getting
the field
whole,
manual, the
pedagogy.
field manual is expressed by the dashboard. It's the program it runs basically, and so it's all relevant. So
Yeah.
this is how we keep. Basically, we'll say, let's just say that the field manual is what keeps this from becoming a mess.
Right. Mm-hmm. Looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm.